Well, my friends, it looks like whether or not you did an ICO in the United States does in fact matter, at least in the eyes of the SEC. Cardano is one of the few projects that had the foresight to predict this ICO as original sin scenario and act accordingly from the very beginning. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss the Bittrex SEC complaint, why it's big trouble for Algorand and maybe even for Ethereum, how Cardano very skillfully avoided this same fate, the irony of Gary Gensler's prior public comments around Algorand, and something big from Apple that could disrupt a lot of DeFi. If you immediately noticed and understood the significance of the familiar logos on those sinful apples, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the army of spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh no, he's showing us court documents again. He's going to bore us to death. I'm not going to bore you to death. You're not going to be bored to death. This is actually an important event in sort of like the timeline of crypto's relationship with governments. In this case, the US government and specifically the Securities Exchange Commission inside the US government. This is an important turning point. I'm going to explain why you're not going to be bored to death. So the first thing to understand is what the violations they're alleging. The SEC is alleging the following: that Bittrex was acting as an unregistered securities exchange, securities brokerage, and securities clearinghouse. You can see that in this paragraph right here. In order for them to allege those violations, they need to explain what crypto assets were being traded on the Bittrex platform that are securities. Here's where that gets interesting. So there's an easy road the SEC could have gone down here. They could have named, several random crypto tokens that were being traded on the Bittrex platform and said, there you go, court. There are the securities that were being traded on this unregistered securities exchange. And they did throw a few of those in there, but they also named some pretty big projects, including Omise Go and Dash, which you will definitely know of if you're around crypto prior to this most recent cycle. And they also named, Algorand, who you will definitely know of if you have spent any time at all around crypto. This is a pretty big ecosystem, a big Gen 3 blockchain, one we talk about a lot in Cardano because it shares a lot of the philosophy that I think has driven the development of Cardano. So what's interesting is what they said about Algorand. There were also some very interesting things about Dash, but today we're going to talk about Algorand because it's the most like Cardano. And it's also very unlike Cardano for one important reason. So they point out that the Algorand Foundation conducted the initial algo token sale in 2019, selling 25 million tokens at $240 per algo. You notice they don't care that it was a foundation. They don't care where the foundation was based. They don't care if this is supposed to be some kind of an indicator of decentralization, that it's a foundation. They don't care who, if there's some kind of governance going on by the community of the foundation. They don't care about any of that. All they care is that there was an ICO. And importantly, this is an ICO that sold into the US markets. The sort of wheelhouse of the SEC is supposed to be protecting US investors. So it's very important. It's very important to the SEC and therefore to the US government whether or not you are selling securities to US investors. If you're not selling securities to US investors, then it's a different scenario for the SEC. If you're selling securities to US investors, that's what the SEC does. That's their remit. That's what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be protecting those investors. If there were no US investors in your initial coin offering, it's a different scenario. Here, they're attacking the Algorand Foundation, and they don't care that it's a foundation. All they care about is that an algo token sale happened in 2019. So why does the SEC care so much about this ICO? Because they're going to do what they always do, just go through the prongs of the Howey test. The ICO is the was there an investment of money part. Then they're just going to go through the other prongs. Was there an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits from the efforts of others? So once they've established the ICO investment of money part, then they're going to go on, and it's pretty easy in crypto to convince a reasonable judge that if it's crypto and there was an ICO, it was probably an investment in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits based on the efforts of others that was reasonable. This last part, this is actually two prongs are combining as one here, but it's crypto. Everybody buying crypto assets, for the most part, they are buying it with an expectation that they'll be able to sell that crypto asset later for more money than they bought it for. And the buyer's probably not going to do much to make that happen. They're going to lay back and let the foundation and the development entities do all the work, and they're just going to hope to sell later for some passive income. That's the way it largely works in crypto. So it's easy to establish the prongs of the rest of the Howey test. But here's where the SEC will do some magic wand waving. Right here in this paragraph 179. From the time of its offering and continuing through the relevant period, Algo was offered and sold as an investment contract and therefore a security. Here's where they're saying, if you did that ICO, that's the original sin you can never recover from. If you did an ICO, and we're going to establish that that was an unregistered sale of securities, then forever, all of the secondary trading of that crypto asset on platforms like Bittrex and pretty much every other exchange, all of that trading is also going to be trading of a security. And because you did that ICO, you can never change that. Forever going forward, we're just going to say that that asset is a security because of what happened in the ICO. Here's the catch. There's something these projects like Algorand and Ethereum, who did ICOs in the United States, could have done to improve their situation, in my opinion, vastly. They could have done what Cardano did. Cardano did not do an ICO in the United States. Look at this. This is cardano.org/genesis, where you can find all the information on the Cardano ICO, which happened in Japan under Japanese law and was an ICO where the buyers were all in Asia. Here's the breakdown of the different tranches in the Cardano ICO. And as you can see, tranche 1, Japan, 100%. Tranche 2, almost Japan, 100%. Some from South Korea and Malaysia. Tranche 3, we add Thailand, Taiwan, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Tranche 4, the same sorts of entities. I guess they add Vietnam to the previous entities. But as you can see, the buyers were all Asian buyers, according to this. There was no selling to US investors in the Cardano ICO. This is great because the remit of the SEC is to protect US investors. So if you don't sell your crypto asset to US investors, it's a very different situation for the SEC. The SEC is concerned with protecting US investors. If you do not sell to US investors, it's a very different scenario. I've been saying this for years on this channel. This fundamentally distinguishes Cardano from a regulatory perspective from pretty much all the rest of the big market cap blockchains. Cardano is one of the only ones I know of that did this. They at least seem, according to this, they seem to have completely excluded US investors from their ICO. This is a fundamentally different situation. This is probably the best regulatory play any blockchain ecosystem could have made back at this time when they were all doing ICOs. This to me is the best way you could have possibly done this. So why didn't everybody else do this? Why did they all do their ICOs in the US? Because they got greedy. They were too greedy, and they knew it would be easier to access a gigantic sort of treasure trove of liquidity if they included the North American market. They knew there were a huge number of investors interested in crypto in the North American market, so they just went ahead. They wanted to access those investors because they felt like that was the biggest pot of investors they could possibly access. So they just went ahead and did it. I think they all could have done ICOs outside of the United States, but they wanted to access those gigantic amounts of money available from the US investors. They got too greedy and they did it that way. Cardano probably didn't raise nearly as much money as it could have if it would have done its ICO in North America. Instead, they did it here because it was a better regulatory play. Now, I'm not saying this somehow makes Cardano impervious to any kind of regulatory attack from the SEC. This SEC is crazy. They could file an enforcement action against anybody. I could see them coming up with some argument to file some kind of a complaint against virtually any blockchain project, no matter how well they manage the regulatory risks. But I am saying that Cardano seems to have made a much better regulatory play. They seem to be in a much better situation because they didn't get greedy. They didn't do what everybody else did. Having said all that, people are pointing out the irony today of the SEC going after Algorand when there are videos like this out there of SEC chair Gary Gensler talking so glowingly about Algorand, who he says was built by his friend Silvio Macaulay, of course, the famous academic who is one of the founders of Algorand. He says that it's a great technology and you could use it to build Uber on top of the blockchain. People are describing this as Gary Gensler having shilled Algorand. So we can debate whether or not you have to actually get paid to be shilling something, but he's definitely talking very glowingly about Algorand, talking about how someone could build an Uber on top of the Algorand blockchain. Then he becomes SEC chair, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, if you're even just trading Algorand on your online platform, you're actually a securities violator, let alone if you built, actual projects on top of the Algorand blockchain, which is exactly what he was suggesting in this video. The hypocrisy of all this has even inspired a music video at this point. I strongly suggest you listen to this if you want to hear a musical rendition of Gary Gensler's exact words describing Algorand previous to all this. Finally, people are reporting that a new savings account offered by Apple through Goldman Sachs could crush a lot of the big DeFi projects. So this poster is reporting the interest yield on that Apple savings account as this number, and then he has this list of, I'll just call these EVM world DeFi platforms. I know a bunch of these projects are running on multiple blockchains, but I'll just call them EVM world DeFi platforms. So he's got this list showing these yields over here. And if these numbers are accurate, I'm not presenting any of this as truth. I have no idea what the actual numbers are. But if this poster is accurate with these numbers here, then indeed it looks like this simple savings account from gigantic, well-known institutions like Apple and Goldman Sachs would make, giving your liquidity to these platforms pretty unattractive at these numbers. So of course, any DeFi person would see this and say, no, you don't understand. My favorite platform in my favorite ecosystem offers, some much greater yield than the ones listed here. But of course, there are always these trade-offs. There are trade-offs in terms of the risk of those platforms, especially a lot of the smaller platforms. There's always risk that there could be some kind of exploit where you lose all your money. And often there's also non-exploit risks built into the platform. There's something that could happen even in the absence of an exploit, some kind of a liquidation or something where you also lose all your money. So it seems like, there is this risk curve in DeFi, as, there always has been, where there are sort of these higher yield activities you can engage in, and there are higher risks as you go. This is, a pretty normal circumstance with all kinds of financial activities inside and outside of crypto. But it does look like if the numbers are the way this poster is reporting, this new Apple savings account could have a pretty big impact on sort of just DeFi generally in crypto. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.